Hello and welcome to Tokyo Inklings. My name is CY and you can find me on my website at tokyostationpens.com, on Instagram and TikTok at tokyostationpens, and on Twitter at tokyostationmnh.
And my name is Jacob and I'm Fudafan on Instagram and on Twitter and have a blog at fudafan.com.
And welcome to episode 42 of Tokyo Inklings. Now, Jacob, we've done this several times. We always start off with a review, so I'm going to go right into it if you don't mind.
Let's do it.
All right. So, the first review is by Jan Makes Things via Apple Podcasts from Australia. And Jan Makes Things says, like sitting in a room with friends, 5 stars. I've been dangerously enjoying this podcast for a few months now. I love the mood that CY and Jacob set, and the podcast sounds like friends sitting in a cafe chatting over their favorite hobby, which makes it a great, relaxing listen. I enjoy the juxtaposition of CY's energy against Jacob's calming presence. I really love the Japanese focus the show has, being a major lover of Sailor exclusives. It's wonderful to hear them being talked about, as well as possible releases upcoming. I mentioned at the beginning that this podcast is dangerous as listening to it, and keeping the show notes open is bad for the wallet.
That's what we're aiming for. I think they managed to perfectly capture what we're trying to do, what we're hoping to do with this podcast. So I'm very happy with this review.
To make them spend money.
Yes, of course.
I can attest to Jan's feelings because Jan often buys these Sailor exclusives from me. So, I know that Jan started this year with not so many Sailor exclusives, and now she's got a fairly decent collection of Hachimonjiyas and Shishikuras and stuff like that. So I'd say on my part, mission accomplished, and yes, pretty dangerous for her. But I think that's part of the fun, right? I mean, you learn stuff and you discover what's on the market, and then you see something that maybe you like. And I think that's just the great thing about this hobby. There's something that that is for everyone. And we kind of talked about this last episode too with the Maruzen show and how we were juxtaposing the pilot and the Sailor exclusives and how they're a bit different. Yeah. And, there's always something out there for somebody, and because our interests, you and our interests aren't always aligned as well, so
they usually aren't.
But that means we get to cover quite a wide array of topics there, and sure. I wouldn't say we're necessarily like disinterested in each other's interests, right? But it's maybe not something that we would have for ourselves.
Sure.
Except the Moonman T1. That's a great release.
Yeah, for some reason that's the one we agree on.
Yeah. All right. And then moving on to the second review. The second review is, I cannot pronounce this name, but it says or it's written TSIS and then PW. Don't know how to say that, so I'm sorry if I butchered your name. But this was via a podcast from the United States of America. And this person says, top source in English for the Japanese fountain pen scene! 5 stars. First heard about Tokyo Inklings from The Pen Addict. CY and Jacob have a calm and soothing chemistry that work really well together. They are well researched and well knowledgeable about the Japanese fountain pen scene. One of the few podcasts that I feel safe having my sons listen to and try to also join me on this hobby. Always a pleasure to catch up on the latest episode, a couple of jolly good fellows.
Only until the son starts spending money.
That's right. And, we do try to keep the podcast clean. So that everybody can enjoy it. I think it's so nice to know that people are out there, sharing this hobby with their kids and feeling safe to listen to our podcast while doing that.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more.
And Jacob, you have an offspring as well.
Yeah. He's not quite into fountain pens though. I bought him a Kakuno, but he has shown little interest in that.
We'll have to send him to re-education camp.
For sure.
All right, and jokes aside, that has been the reviews, and writing reviews for us is really the currency to pay us for what we do. The show is free. You get all the content for free, and it's going to stay that way. But we really appreciate when people write reviews for us and really spread the word. Help us just make the podcast bigger, get more listenership. And so we really appreciate if you could write a review, make it your Instagram story, make it your Instagram post, post on your Facebook groups, talk about us on Reddit, on your TikToks, whatever it is. That really, really helps us out. And something that I was working on a few weeks ago, and I kind of showed a draft already to Jacob, is that we are working on some sort of a Patreon to be released in sometime in the future. But for now, it is the best way to pay us for what we do, just by writing a review. And the best part about that is that it's free. It doesn't cost you anything. So please help us spread the word.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if we do a Patreon, I mean, we're still going to have, all the content is going to be free, as you say. And to be honest, I'm not too much in a hurry to do a Patreon. It will come eventually, but, not in a hurry.
Yep, that's right. And now let's get into our episode. I've been in Hong Kong for 3 weeks now. I came back to Japan yesterday. And the quarantine was just absolutely brutal. We weren't allowed to leave our hotel rooms. Got tested every 2 days while I was in Hong Kong. And the results show there. It's 0 locally transmitted cases. Go ahead.
When you say tested, do they do the same kind of PCR test as in Japan, where you spit?
So I got tested with the nasal and throat swab. I think I did that test 3 times, and then to come back to Japan, because Japan has to have special rules. So everywhere else in the world, they accept the nasal and throat swab, but in order to come back to Japan, you have to do the deep nasal swab. So that's the one where they really poke far down into your nasal canal. And I did that one yesterday. Actually, I got tested twice yesterday because I had to do that nasal test to board the flight. And then after I got to Japan, I had to take the spit test. But otherwise, it was mostly the nasal and throat swab, which was okay. But I did like 5 tests in the last 3 weeks. All negative. But now I'm back home, and I went to Hong Kong for several reasons. I had some things that I needed to settle in Hong Kong regarding things like my passport, family and stuff like that. But one of the other reasons why I went to Hong Kong is because I bought a pen from Muse Pens. Now, for those of you who aren't very familiar with the Hong Kong scene, there is actually quite in my opinion, there is quite a vibrant scene in Hong Kong. And the retail shops there, I would say there are 2 major ones now. There used to be more, but there are 2 major ones now, maybe 3, but 2 with like real stores, right? The first one is Ink House, and Ink House is the one where you see this huge wall of inks just lined up. They have their own line of inks as well. I did buy one of their inks, and they're actually, apparently they are the distributors of Sailor. And I was surprised because actually the prices at Ink House were even better than they were in Japan. So really cool to see that. They had stuff like AP collection. They had loads of urushi, loads of super high-end stuff. And I think they're also I know that they're also related to Lamy China. So they had all these cool Lamy exclusives, and they're the ones that are gonna bring out the Lamy minions out to Hong Kong. So that was really, really cool. And so that was kind of the first shop. The second shop is Muse Pens.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting, the difference between these 2 shops, because Ink House had a really clean, almost like almost if I had to give a comparison, they were almost like shosaikan, right? They're really cool, lots of high end stuff, stuff that you'd probably never be able to see it anywhere else. And then there's Muse Pens, and Muse Pens is more like Bunga Box, all right?
This is Mr. CPN's shop, right?
That is, yes, it is Mr. CPN's shop, and I'll have to say the visual merchandising is excellent at Ink House, and Muse Pens looks a lot more like your how should I say this, more generic fountain pen shop. It kind of looks a little bit more like Fuji-san's place, right? However, I think that something that they really did well is they've actually managed to make that into a community space. So when I went, there are just a lot of people who come in, hang out with the staff, chat with the staff, and maybe write with a few pens, and they get out, and you can try all the pens. They had some really cool stuff. They had some customized auroras. They had like a red ripple ebonite 3776. They had all these like cool things as well, but it was just less, I would say, less organized,
right,
but at the same time a bit more inviting. So that kind of vibe that they've created, I think is very successful for them. And I really, really enjoyed how much they focused on that community there, and it was a very cool and good vibes space. I really enjoyed that. Now, I bought a pen from Muse Pens while I was in Japan, and one of the reasons why I went was to pick up this pen. And this pen, funnily enough, is the Aurora Mount Fuji.
So why did you buy that pen from Muse Pens? I mean, not why did you buy the pen, but why did you choose to buy it from Muse Pens?
Yeah, I talked about this Aurora Sun Moon Lake, I think a few episodes ago, right? And I bought it from the US. And at that time I was like, I really want that Mount Fuji, only if it didn't cost like $1,400. When I bought the Aurora at Muse Pens, this Aurora was half the retail price for Japan. So, I mean, it's still a very expensive pen, okay? It's not a cheap pen at all. But now I feel like I've really gotten these two pens that do mean a lot to me, given just, I was born in Taiwan, I live in Japan now. It has a Mount Fuji, a Rising Star, and a Tori, which is, I mean, that's basically the logo of our podcast, right? So
that's true.
So I was like, I do have to get this. I really like it. It is actually a metal section, so that's not the same as the Sun Moon Lake. But the metal section, I actually quite like it. Except it does get a bit fingerprinty, but I like that it weighs the pen down a bit. I have both of them in my hands right now. I wish that this pen is, by the way, it's white. Auroraloid, and Auroraloid is kind of like a crush material, similar to older Conway Stewart crush material. This one is white and translucent, so you can see that there is ink in here, which I think is super, super cool. And it's white, pearlescent, and between that crush, there are these blue speckles all over in between those crush parts. So it does look like that reflection on the lake. I really like that. The pen is rose gold trim. Both the Sun Moon Lake and the Mount Fuji are rose gold trims. But I wish that this pen had, instead of this white auroraloid finial, top finial, I wish it were red. Because, I feel like it's a bit of a lost opportunity, right? Like Mount Fuji, sunrise, the symbol of Japan, you got to put a red top finial on here. But maybe that's a future project that I take on. But for now, I'm very pleased with this pen. It's beautiful. I got it in abroad, and I ground it down to a naginata. But I already have the gocha on my Sun Moon Lake, right? So what I did is I ground this naginata to be more for Chinese writing, so more flat with a flatter triangle. And I'm probably going to swap these two nibs since they're both rose gold anyways.
So did you grind it when you came back to Japan, or did you actually bring your grinding gear to Hong Kong and ground it at your hotel or whatever it was?
I did bring my grinding gear to Hong Kong, and I ground it over there.
Of course.
But it was fun. I was debating whether to grind it to an oblique or a nag, and the reason why is because I tried an OBB at Muse Pens. Jacob, let me tell you this OBB, it's incredible. It's fantastic. So I might just go ahead and order a rose gold OBB, just as a spare, just in case I ever need to use one, from Muse Pens as well. But anyways, that's really fantastic, great pen. And I have to say, sorry I'm taking so long on this, but this Sun Moon Lake, this is an Optima style. So that means it's the flat top, and the Mount Fuji is the 88 style, which means it's the round top.
Right.
The funny thing is that it actually changes the entire balance of the pen. I didn't notice this before, but the Optima, obviously being flat top, it is a bit shorter. The the Mount Fuji, that added length, actually impacts where and how I hold the pen. And I didn't really notice this with sailors, but with this Aurora, it was very apparent to me.
That's interesting, because for me, I do notice the very same thing with sailor pens and pilot pens. So I would always post a pro gear, but I don't feel that I need to post a profit pen. And same thing with a pilot. I always post a custom heritage, but I don't feel I need to post a normal custom pen.
That's interesting. I'm comparing it right now, and the 88, just the body, is actually a bit longer. At least on this model, it is a bit longer than that Optima. So that is pretty interesting. I don't post my pens at all, and usually I can use cigars, flat tops, whatever. But yeah, I guess I just don't have a lot of models where one is a flat top and the other is a round top, but then it's actually the same dimensions.
Right.
Yeah, so that's just an interesting observation that I had.
By the way, one thing about what you said that this pen is cheaper. I think you said half the price, but cheaper in Hong Kong than in Japan. All I would add to that is that that's a fairly low bar, because there are very few Western pens that are affordable in Japan. The only brand that comes to mind is Pelikan. For whatever reason, Pelikan pens are fairly affordable in Japan, but especially Italian pens, they tend to be very expensive in Japan.
Yeah, it must be the distributor, I think. But yeah, I think the price on Italian pens here are a bit of a turnoff, to be honest. Like a regular Optima pen, right? That's like $800 to $900 here in Japan. Whereas the rest of the world, it's more in like the $4 to $600 range, right? So I think the rest of the world, Sailor pricing and Aurora pricing are actually getting pretty competitive.
Yeah.
But in Japan, Sailor is still top because it's just much less expensive to get that.
Yeah. I would say with Sailor, the difference is smaller now than it was before. I feel like they have bumped prices more in Japan than they have elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think Sailor did multiple price increases, right, in the past 2 years. So yeah, I do think that's a fair observation.
Yeah.
But I have also been active on Yahoo Auctions while I was gone. I got several. I got some good deals and some bad deals. One of the good deals that I got was this Montblanc 149, and I have a few Montblanc 149s. Usually they go for, how much do they go for, like $300?
Yeah, like 30,000 to 35,000 yen is probably what you end up paying for. Yeah.
And so if you are serious about buying a Montblanc here, you want to buy secondhand because, one, the nibs are generally better, and two, you get it for half the retail price, right?
Yeah.
I paid $800 for this particular 149. Did I tell you about this 149?
The only Montblanc I remember you bought was that you got some fantastic some guy deal on Mercury, so I assume this is a different one.
Yeah, this is a different one. So this pen is a 1950s celluloid Montblanc 149 from the later half of the 1950s with a round ebonite feed and a telescopic piston filler. These usually go for about $1,600 to maybe $2,000, at least the ones that I've seen, right? So I put an early bid on it, and I put like initially $500 as my max price, and then I see these people they're coming, they're trying to push the price up a bit. I'm still the max bidder, right? So and then I put like 800. I just didn't want them to feel that there was a limit, so they could keep going. But if they go too far, they have to pay for it, right? So I kind of use that like mind trick, in a sense, to really keep that max bid high enough, but not as high as I might otherwise have paid for. And it was an excruciating 2 weeks to wait for this pen, Jacob, because I didn't know if it worked or not. So I got the pen. I came back yesterday. The pen does not work.
But are the parts, like, the piston and so on, are they so unusual that you would be difficult to find replacements?
Here's the thing. The piston does not work, but it might be serviceable. So the piston is actually stuck in the pen, and I've bought a tool now to disassemble that piston, so I just need it to be sent to me from the United States. But I really need to open up the pen first in order to see whether it is salvageable or not. Hopefully it is, but if it's not, I don't think that's necessarily a huge deal. I can always get, either Kanesaki-san or somebody else to rebuild a body around that for me. I don't think it's a huge deal. This nib, though.
I also wonder if Mr. Eurobox potentially has replacement parts. I think he's big on repair and replacements. Yeah.
He has the tool to disassemble it. I know because I've brought some of these celluloid Montblancs to him before. It's just so hard to book his time now. I mean, he only works 2 days in a week. It's really hard to get his time. Yeah. So maybe I'll go that way if I can't actually open up the body, but I'm not too bothered. I think as long as the telescopic piston still telescopes, I'll either refurbish it myself, or I will try to get a pen built around it. And I think, you know what, even if it's a regular piston built around this pen, the nib and the feed itself is just incredible. This nib is actually very, very flexy. And I think the way that Montblanc used to make their nibs, it must be different to how they do it now. And an interesting conversation that I had with Mr. CPN was this idea of making in-house nibs. So when somebody says they make their nibs in-house, what do you think?
So, yeah, I think sometimes that's a bit disingenuous. I think some pen makers, when they say we have our own in-house nibs, usually that means, we are using Moonman nibs rebranded, right? So there may be cases, very few rare cases, where in-house really means custom-made nibs, but I think that is an overused term.
Yeah, I had this exact conversation with CPN. He says, Montblanc, what in-house means to them means they have they buy like a sheet of gold, like they buy like 14K gold, and then they cut into shape, and then they shape the nib, and they do the engraving, and then they do the tipping, right? That can be considered in-house, right? And he was saying, but for Aurora, what Aurora considers in-house is they buy the gold, they melt it down, they hammer it into sheets, and then they make the nib.
That's properly in-house.
Yeah. So Montblanc, there's some rumors that they're now made by Bach. I don't really know, but for sure, in-house Montblanc nibs of the 1950s is not the same as the in-house nibs of today. And you can really feel it. This bounciness, this responsiveness to your hand, that's really something that we don't see a lot anymore in especially modern Montblanc nibs. And, trust me, I know, I've got plenty of them. It's a totally different writing experience. And I mean, this triple tone, this 3-tone plating, I can see why this pen got really popular really quickly back in the 50s.
So, do you think it's more flexy because of the alloy or because of the geometry, or do you think the fact that this nib has potentially been used for decades also has something to do with it?
I think there's probably like a good combination of all of them, but I think this usage idea, if the alloy is not flexy to begin with, usually if you just press hard down on it, it kind of flays and doesn't come back, right?
Right.
So I think maybe there's part of it is that the geometry looks to me to be exactly the same. I would say that the alloy is probably the biggest part of it, particular for this nib. The alloy that is used probably is different, and probably they were making it in-house back in the day, so they knew exactly what would go in there. Whereas if you just buy generic 14K gold and then just cut out the nibs and stamp them, you don't necessarily know exactly what the composition of that is and how that affects the writing. So that's my 149 story. And then I finally tried this aerofoil paper.
Right. Yes. What do you think?
It feels awful to write on, but I don't think it's Cosmo Airlight.
Why is that?
Because Cosmo Airlight kind of spreads when you write on it.
But I think the Cosmo Airlight that you used before is this Yamamoto notebook, and that is the 83 GSM, which is even more spongy, as Alessa calls it. So this is the 75 GSM, which is slightly different.
That might be why then. That might be why. Yeah, but it still feels pretty awful to write on. I think the texture makes it artificially smooth.
Yeah.
and that's why it was awful?
Yeah, it has this, I don't know how to describe it. It feels like you're writing on plastic.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. It's it'll be part of my next giveaway.
I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will.
No, very, very soon. But honestly, seriously speaking, I will be doing a giveaway of this Iroful paper with some Kakimori inks. So yeah, pretty interested in seeing how those interact with this paper as well.
Yeah, well, the Kakimori inks, we covered that. I think at least I've talked about that before. They are, in my experience, some of the most aggressive inks you can imagine. They're usually very nice to write on. They have by far the highest viscosity of any inks that the Shumibun has tested, but they must have had some mixed it in with some, I don't know, surfactants or whatever, something that makes it flow better, because it feels, they flow fairly well, but it feels cushioned in a way that water inks don't feel like. But that's also the same thing that causes them to bleed on almost anything.
Right, and this Irofil also makes it feel cushioned, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so anyways, the Irofil, I do have to say that ink does look pretty nice.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But I think some people will absolutely love this paper.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. If you love Cosmo or Light, I think this is fantastic paper for you. If you like really smooth writing, this paper could be for you.
Yeah.
All right, and on the next point, I have Jacob X2.
Yeah, so I received two pens that I wanted to talk about. So first of all, a collector, a very generous collector, sent me a pen from his personal collection. And this was a Lusso pen with a number 8, a large titanium nib, and it had one of those beautiful Brooks acrylic called Bohemian Twilight, I think. But not only that, but he offered to send it to me via Mr. Nib Grinder, Mark Bacchus. So not only did I get a very nice pen, I got a custom Bacchus grind on it too, which was just remarkably generous. And as you know, I am a fan of Bacchus Predator grind and Architect grind, but this particular nib didn't quite have enough tipping for that kind of grind. So instead I asked Bacchus if he could do a Waverly. Actually, I went back and forth a little bit between Waverly and Minifude, which are kind of similar nibs, but they have different goals, right? So Minifude gives you a little bit of that brushed, almost naginata-ish flair while still being useful for everyday writing, while a Waverly doesn't give you much in the way of line variation, but it's less sensitive to writing angle, it's less sensitive to how you tilt your pen than your regular, fine or medium nib. So, and they're said to be good for lefties. At least Pilot's pen doctor told me that Waverly nibs are very good for lefties. So,
all right.
So I asked Bacchus if he could do a Waverly, and of course he could do a Waverly. So he did that and sent me the pen, and I got it a few days ago, and it is absolutely beautiful with this Brooks acrylic, and as I have come to expect from Bacchus nib grinds, it's just like chef's kiss. So even though it's a Waverly, it actually has a little bit of that pencil feedback, which surprised me a bit, but I think it might have to do with the material. So a Pilot Waverly has almost no feedback at all, right? While this one has a little bit of that pencil feedback, which I really quite enjoy. But the reason I wanted to talk about this pen is that up until now I haven't really paid attention to these so-called maker pens. I just thought of them as, Jovo nib holders, which is both true, but at the same time just missing the point. It's missing the point because you're not typically buying a maker pen because of the nib or the feed or even the filling system, because those are, with some notable exceptions, they're usually just your like standard block or Jowo cartridge converters. Instead, the selling point, the reason why you buy these maker pens is usually the material, right? And especially these beautiful custom acrylics. Obviously, Brooks is probably the biggest name in the industry, and for very good reason. He's a wizard. But I've come to realize there are more and more people now pouring their own custom acrylics, even like there are pen makers making their own acrylics as well. I think, for example, what's the name? There's a Belgian pen maker,
Giant's Pen.
Yeah. I think that they pour their own acrylics, for example, and they, by the way, do even more wild stuff. I think they were the ones that made this wooden pen that was stabilized with diamond cast, which was just crazy in just the best possible way, right?
Right, and then they made a color shifting Alumilite, I think, or acrylic.
Exactly. So I think that's where the innovation is now, and I think that is very interesting. And I have sort of, I feel like I've missed that. It's been in my blind spot because I didn't really pay attention to these maker pens. I feel like I want to pay more attention to these maker pens now. And one thing in particular that I'm interested in, I want to see is how these acrylic designs might change over time, because right now we are in let's call it like a primary manipulation phase, by which I mean many of these acrylics are very colorful. There are a lot of swirls, there's a lot of sparkles like Itoya and see. They're very intense in that sense, right?
Right.
And I wonder if we're gonna see some kind of counter trend, something a bit more muted, something a bit less intense, similar to with inks, right? So if you think about like a few years ago, a lot of people were into these saturated, intense like sheen monsterings. I'm thinking about like Robert Oster, Fire and Ice, and some even more extreme like Krishna inks, and I think KWZ and others. But then we saw something of like a counter trend. We saw these like muted inks, we saw these pastel colored chroma shading inks. I wonder if we are going to see something more like that in these acrylics as well. That's now this turned into something of a prediction as well, but that's sort of what I'm suspecting and what I want to see. What is your take on that?
So Giant's Pen actually has a pen of mine to redo, or rather build a new body around. I think that I think there are several components to this, right? The first is the reason why we kind of associate these pens with whatever Bach nib holder or Jowo stick or whatever. A lot of the pens that a lot of these independent makers make are almost always the same generic shape. Okay, so there are some makers that have very unique shapes, but most of the time it's kind of a generic shape. Some of the unique shapes maybe that I can point out are Skogsy pen, I think, has one that looks a lot like it looks kind of like a Nakaya, a silhouette, but I think they make really nice pens, and the way that they do it with micarta and have all the patterns line up, right? That's very, very cool. Again, I think Luso is one because he does these cool Damascus steel clips. So we have some makers that do make very cool, unique shapes. But I would say maybe 80% of the independent maker industry kind of looks all the same to me. So where they differentiate is in the materials that they use, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's where you're getting at. I have a primary manipulation pen in front of me right now. I have, I think this is the Vesuvio. Leonardo, I believe this is the first run where Leonardo made a Momento Zero Grandes piston fillers out of actually primary manipulation.
Mm.
One. Have you held primary manipulation in your hands?
No, I've only seen photos. I never have seen one in person.
Okay, I will bring this pen to you next time. I think the allure of this pen is that it's got like 6 or 7 different colors in it with translucent parts and opaque parts.
Yeah.
And I have to say that no other material really looks like this. It is a fantastic material. And then you have those like Bohemian Twilights or Red Cherry Koi that Brooks does, where there's a little bit more of like, I believe the Bohemian Twilight has some glitter in it, right?
Yeah.
So I think those two, this swirly but semi-translucent plus opaque colors, that's one trend.
Yes.
And then the swirly stuff with glitter, but that is mostly opaque, is a second trend.
Okay.
So I think that they are different things.
But I think they're similar in the sense that they're both very like intense. Like if you have a pen that has a little ink window or where you can see the ink, it's like you don't even see the ink because the color of the barrel is so intense.
Yes, that I agree with you. Will there be a return to muted colors? I think that's difficult because as far as I can see, the trend is going to, for acrylics, right? Going to these sparkly shimmering stuff. If you want more muted colors, my question is why not use ebonite, right? Why not use some other more generic materials?
Well, the reason will be that you want to differentiate, right? You want to make something that no one else has. It can't look like your regular SCM or Nico Ebonite.
Right, but it also can't look like a generic black either, right? Because
yeah, of course. But that's probably taking it a bit too far.
Right, so I'm wondering, I guess what I'm getting at here is, I'm curious as to how that idea of more muted colors, how that would take shape. And, maybe some genius pourer will pour something that is absolutely fantastic and blows us out of the water, and then, we'll be like, oh, that's what it would look like. Right now, I don't see that on the market. There is one more thing that I want to explore. I think that it would be really cool if somebody could do a bunch of sheets of whatever, the celluloid, acrylic, doesn't really matter. Those sheets that they use for making glasses. Use epoxy, put them together to make something similar to like stacked celluloid or like an Arco effect or a micarta effect, right? I think that would be extremely, extremely cool. I know that Giant's Pen has done something like that on a pen where they stack different materials, but they've not created like blanks where it's just stacked sheets of different material put together. So I think that could be cool, and if that came onto the market, that might be popular.
So I think one possible example of what it might look like is the current Hachimondia pen, right? So they don't have many colors, but they have just a single color, right? And they're fairly light and not that intense, but they have this. There's this transparency or translucency to it, which I think elevates them over your regular single colored pens. And I would like to see more pen makers doing something like that.
That could be interesting. That I think, like a material like this on a Skog C pen, that could look really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I can get behind that.
So I think what we're really saying is that we think it's going to be some kind of counter trend to this very intense primary manipulation type acrylic, but we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but it will be interesting to see.
It would be nice to have. I don't know if it will happen or not, but it would be nice to have.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So there was one more pen I wanted to talk about. So Endless sent me a pen. Actually, I should clarify because I realized there are two stationery companies called Endless. There is Endless out of India, and they make mostly notebooks, right? The Endless Recorder. Then there's Endless in the US, and they are an online retailer. And this time it was Endless in the US that sent me a pen. So this is a pen called Kilk, which is I think from Turkey. It's like a small pen maker out of Turkey. And I wrote a review about this pen and I posted on my blog. So I'm not going to talk about that review now. That's not sort of the point. I'll put a link in the show notes. But the reason why I wanted to mention this is because of the nib. So this pen came with a Bock steel double broad nib. And we have talked recently about, we have spent hours talking about like naginata togis and similar grinds and what kind of nibs you need as starting point for a grind like that. And we have said that some of these so-called double broad nibs, they're effectively just stubs. So you remember that Montblanc double broad nib that I had, there wasn't really that much of a drop, as you call it, on that nib, right?
Right.
So I was curious about how this Bock double broad looked like, and it's actually a little bit of a drop on this nib. It's not as much as a Japanese coarse nib or a Japanese zoom nib, but there's definitely some of it there. And I think if you want a relatively affordable like starting point that could be ground to a naginata togi, I think a Bock steel double broad could be a good option.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be very interesting. But aren't they a bit hard to get a hold of just like loose?
That I'm not actually sure. I just naively assume that you could just go to like FP Nibs and get Bock double broad. Is that not the case?
Maybe you can. I've just never had the thought of doing that.
Yeah, because you're a gold snob, so you wouldn't do
right.
that, right? But
that's absolutely right.
But these coarse nibs and zoom nibs, they're not exactly cheap, especially, I mean, with the recent price increase. They are quite expensive, right? So by comparison, I think a Bock steel double broad is like a small fraction of that price. So if you just want someone to make you a naginata and you don't want to spend hundreds of dollars on a zoom, I think this could be a good option.
Yeah, I think it could be, for sure. Yeah, I definitely... It's still a BB right now, right?
Yeah, I haven't done anything to it myself. Yeah, that's for sure.
All right, yeah. Then definitely bring it out. Bring it out next time we see it.
I'll bring it. We'll see if it ever comes back and in what shape it comes back. Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be the day we record our next podcast.
That's true.
All right. So that's been a lot on whatever we bought.
Yes.
Event reports. You went to a System Techo salon, I think, a few days ago.
Yeah, so Itoya has this annual System Techo or System Planner event. And this year's event was started 2 days ago. And I happened to have a day off because I had worked last weekend. So I went there, and this was on the 10th floor of the main Itoya building. So they had this event space on the 10th floor. And it was quite confusing at first. It took a while for me to figure it out. But they had divided into two areas. One area had, their regular lineup of planners, the ones that you can buy on any day at Itoya, and that area also had the refills and hole punches and other accessories. It was still fairly crowded, but not too bad. Then there was another area separated by a glass wall, and that's where they sold the show exclusive, the event exclusive planners.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out, I didn't know this in advance, but you had to make a reservation if you wanted to enter that area.
Oh,
Yes.
Ooh, okay. So you didn't actually get to go in?
I didn't get to go in, which is probably for the best because I had recently bought another new planner once again. So I the last thing I needed was yet another planner. But fortunately, because it was just a glass wall. Separate. I could see what they were selling, and it was mostly Ashford. Actually, it was very Ashford centric. And
hold on. You didn't tell us about this new planner.
oh yes, so well, that's true. Well, it was maybe not too exciting, but I went to Mercari and I bought a Bindex planner. So Bindex is a planner brand by the same company that sells Nolte planner. So Nolte is sort of the Toyota, and Bindex is the Lexus. Sort of the
Okay.
So Bindex is their system planner. So I needed one. I had a special product that works. I needed a dedicated planner for that, and I managed to find a fantastic price on Mercari, and this is one of those planners that has very small rings. It's fairly slim, which is a good thing. Yeah, I only started using it, so I might have more to say about it once I've used it more. But so far, I'm happy with it.
Sorry, but anyways,
back to this event. The one thing that struck me was the price, the prices. So we talked recently about plotter, right? And we said that if you're new to system planners, you might be surprised by how expensive these plotters are. But it turns out that plotters were some of the most affordable planners at this event. Yeah. They were far from the most expensive ones. So for example, Ashford was selling an M5 micro 5 size planner. So micro 5 is like smaller than a pocket notebook. It's like ink swatch card size planner,
and it's almost impossible to get hole punches for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless they're made by Ashford.
Yes, exactly. They sold those for 35,000 yen, which is twice as much as a plotter A5. So that was quite expensive. And then there was another brand called Brelio, I think. Their regular A5 sister planners were close to 80,000 yen. So like 4 times as expensive as the plotter.
Yeah, and you can really get like expensive system techos. So if you look on an account like Aya, Aya 6780, she's got all of these like exotic leather plotters, or not plotters, exotic leather system techos, and those cost a pretty penny. So yeah, definitely don't underestimate how expensive these can get.
Yes, for sure. But once you're bought into one of those system planners, the accessories are not that expensive. The refills are fairly cheap, and that's, what we talked about that before at length. But this is one of the selling points, that there are various brands selling refills, and you have a wealth of options. So for example, I was very tempted to buy A5 refills by Kokuyo because they were selling Chobo refills. So Chobo is Kokuyo's like top of the line paper. It's the paper that originally made for like bank ledgers, and it's been around for almost 100 years. And it's also the paper they use in their expensive Century notebooks. And there's been rumors about this paper being discontinued. I haven't seen any evidence of that, but it's generally fairly hard to find paper. But here, Itoya sold Kokuyo Chobo refills for quite a low price. I can't remember what it was, but it was like 500 yen or something like that for like 50 sheets or something like that. So I'm drowning in paper, so I didn't actually buy any, but I was very tempted.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think definitely these system techo, I do find it hard pressed to, when you compare like a regular notebook and system techo, if you can get the same thing in a system techo, why not? You've got all these awesome covers to work with.
Yeah, to me, I mean, the reason why I like them is that I usually don't use them as like planners in a normal sense. I usually, if you have some kind of project and I need to move around pages and add more refills, that's the appeal to me, that the ability to just add and move around pages. Right.
Yeah, for sure. I guess if you want something that's like a dated journal, then probably like Hobonichi works pretty well. I mean, I myself bought a Weeks, so I'm hoping that works out better for me. But then if you're doing like bullet journaling, I actually think bullet journaling works really well for the system techo like infrastructure.
Yeah, for sure. That could be a good combination. Yeah.
Because I think the thing about bullet journaling is that if you make a mistake, right, you kind of just think, I kind of ruined it. But then with system techo, you can actually just swap out that single sheet.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Next thing, I mentioned that I went to Hong Kong. I talked about Muse, talked about Ink House. Leo Falk, who we've had on the podcast fairly recently, was very gracious to invite me to one of the Hong Kong Saturday morning meetups, and met a lot of cool people there. They were mostly vintage collectors, and they were very knowledgeable about like specific details on vintage pens, like extremely into that part of the world. And I guess that's something that I'm a little bit less knowledgeable about. I mean, I have vintage pens, but I'm certainly not at that level of knowledge. And somebody called Simon brought these pencils, these retractable mechanical pencils. And I had actually already seen this on Leo's Instagram, but what's interesting about these pencils is that they are italic pencils. So the lead is shaped like an italic nib.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. I got 2 of these pencils, so I'll probably send one off to you as well next time we see each other. But that was very, very nice and very awesome of him.
I think some of those people were featured in Shuminu Bungabaku, right? When they had both some Japanese and Hong Kong pen collectors.
Yes, that's right. So when I was there, I was saying, hey, actually, we've all kind of, I guess, we've met each other in the pages.
Yeah.
But this is obviously the first time I met them in real life. But yeah, that was that crew over there. Yeah. And then I think the last thing that I want to talk about is that I've started this business cursive class, and I was in quarantine. The internet wasn't so good, so I wasn't able to make the first 2. The third one I made, and it was very interesting because it kind of got me rethinking about why I'm using fountain pens, how I can use them better, and I did kind of just want to chat about whether you use your pens do you ever like practice writing?
If I practice writing,
Yeah.
not as much as I should, but I fairly recently tried to do more printing, because like last year, as you know, I had to study a lot for some like professional qualifications, and I had to be able to, first time in a while, it was really important that I could read what I wrote, right?
Yeah.
And that is not always the case with my cursive. Sometimes I'm struggling to figure out what I actually wrote.
Right.
So I did spend some time to try to come up with something that wasn't necessarily pretty, but it was fully readable. So that's the extent of my practice.
Right. Do you ever think like, oh, I want to, consciously put in an effort to maybe improve this particular letter? I want it to look a different way, or are you regularly pretty happy with how your characters look?
No, that actually happens. I mean, in particular, if someone writes a particular letter in a way I like, I just steal that from them and try to get that into my system.
Yeah, I find that for myself, I'm fairly okay with how my letters look generally, but I have difficulty in spacing and consistency. So my letters are just, they're different sizes and they're like all over the place. So that's something that I really wanted to actively improve at. So that's why I'm taking this business cursive class. It's very good. Definitely recommend it. Maybe we'll link this teacher's page in the show notes. But yeah, I'm trying to improve a little bit on my handwriting and just get better at using the wonderful tools that I have. Yeah. All right. Let's wrap it up with some Sailor Urushi stuff.
Yeah, I put a link in the show notes. Maybe you have already seen this, but they just announced 3 new urushi pens. You might recognize the shape because in 2 years ago, slightly more than 2 years ago, they released like 3 or 4 pens with the same shape but with different urushi designs. So here they're reusing the shape, but they have new urushi designs. So there are like 2 different styles from Tohoku, northern Japan, and then there's one from Ishikawa, I think. And they look very nice. They look more elaborate than the 3 previous ones. But the thing that struck me was that they have raised the price by exactly 50%. So in 2 years they bumped the price with 50%. So these are 132,000 yen instead of 88,000 yen plus tax.
Do you like how these look?
I like the middle one, the one called Kino Shiru or something like that. There's an Iwate style that
Right.
It doesn't actually look like urushi. It looks more like one of those like acrylics that we talked about before. But I like how they managed to do that transparency, and I would like to see it in person because I've talked a lot to Hiroko about which particular colors are well suited for like transparency or translucency, and she tends to favor like red and orange because it's easier to get that that translucent look, and it's particularly hard with like red and green, she said. But here they seem to have done it well with some kind of green, blue, turquoisey color, which looks nice.
Yeah, I think let's start with the shape. Really don't like the shape. It's okay. It just you know those replacement bodies, like those replacement wood bodies that you sometimes see on like Mercari and Yahoo auctions for like pilots. Like that's what this looks like to me.
I think uncapped it looks pretty nice, but capped it looks like a mushroom.
That's a way to put it. I just feel like these could have had any random nib on it and would have been the same pen, right? Like these don't look like sailors to me. So I feel like just in terms of the design language there, if it wasn't for the nib, like how would I know that it's a sailor? That kind of bothers me a bit.
Yeah, I agree. It seems to be, so this seems to be like a shape they came up with only to do this, maybe, I don't know, annual or whatever it may be, like regular urushi designs. In a way, that reminds me of what Wanshur is doing. Like they came up with that, or maybe they bought or borrowed that dream pen shape, right? And now they seem to use that as a base for like a new urushi design every few months. It looks like Sailor. It's doing the same thing here.
Well, it looks like a Wanshur pen. I agree with you. The middle one is interesting and looks different from like other urushi. Obviously, we won't know until we have them in hand. But I'd be intrigued to see this one. And I have heard the same thing, that green is particularly difficult. My personal favorite might be the red Ishikawa one, but I'm not quite sure how it's different from like regular Taminuri.
Yeah, it does look a lot like Taminuri, that's for sure.
Right, it looks like Akataminuri. I mean, again, I won't really be able to see until I have it in hand. This Aomori one, I really don't like.
It's definitely not my taste either, but I find it interesting because it's once again, just like the green one, it's not. If you didn't know, you might not even think that it's urushi, right? It looks like some wild acrylic, at least at a distance.
Yeah. I think it looks like somebody dropped paint. No, but it's definitely different. It's definitely different. Maybe it's just not my taste. Let's leave it at that. It's not my taste.
So at first I thought the the price increase is quite significant. But then I went and looked at the price for gold futures and how that has changed since the previous model was released, and it's actually gone up at pretty much exactly 50% too. Now, obviously, there is more to the pen than the nib, and the nib is not 24K gold. But I thought that was a very interesting correlation, that the price of the pen has gone up almost exactly as much as the corresponding price for gold futures.
This looks like a regular, like a large size Sailor nib, right? So this is not the KOP nib.
Exactly. Yeah, this is the full year. Yeah.
So I don't see the justification of paying $1,300.
Right, but this might be a sign of things to come again. I mean, this might be an indication that the next round of KOPs might also get another bump.
Well, I have a Kaiha that I am going to sell, so maybe I should wait for that.
Yeah, I remember when we talked about the Kaiha when it came out, and even though, it's an interesting pen because it's obviously Nagahara's last Sailor pen, but we thought even so it was quite expensive. Now it seems outright affordable compared to this year's Sailor releases.
No, absolutely. I mean, the regular Ebonite KOPs are 1,700 now, so. Yeah, it's crazy.
But what is hilarious is that if you go to Maruzen and look at their display, you see this. They still have a few of these KOP,
the older ones, right?
Asian way, right? And they still sell that at the old MSRP. So you're paying like 65,000 yen for that. And then next to the Asian way, you have the regular boring black resin, which is even more expensive.
All right, yeah. Anyways, new Sailor Urushi. I always feel like I almost wish Sailor gave up on Urushi because Nakaya and Pilot just do it so much better. I think they're kind of playing out of their niche here. What do you think?
I like these. I mean, the base pen aside, I like what they're doing here because this is different from what you've seen in the past. Like, they have been fairly conservative with Taminuri style or like Ishime style. This is fairly unusual, and I give them credit for selling some fairly unusual urushi designs.
So I just sent you a post on Instagram from Izumi Pen, and this is a picture of a Sailor Double Dragon KOP from back in the days. If they did stuff like this kind of quality, I'd be like, Sailor, go do urushi.
Yeah, I think this appeals to a different audience. I feel like this is more. I don't want to get in trouble again, but I feel like let's just leave it there. I feel like it appeals to a different audience.
Right, but what I'm saying is that like the quality of urushi here, that the section is done, the overall finish, the colors, the range of styles that they use here, just the techniques overall, right? It seems a lot more high quality, and this is obviously very much a Pilot style urushi that they do. Yeah. But even for the other stuff. Remember when they came out with this Wabi Sabi Urushi King of Pen? That
I only vaguely recall that, yeah.
It looked like a bad burn victim. And
now I remember.
It's just that. If you're gonna do that kind of stuff, I'd rather you not do the Urushi. If you want to do the Urushi, then I really want you to do it properly. And I feel like, I just wonder, is Sailor doing urushi just to do urushi, or do they do urushi because they've got something to say here? Yeah.
But I don't completely agree, because I think that someone might find that green one we just talked about appealing because it's like a stylish pen, and I think the same person might think that this Izumi pen is like ostentatious and like an Oyaji pen, right?
I agree. but you wouldn't be able to find this double dragon pen on an acrylic body, right?
Right.
Like it's not possible. But the blue one, you could make something that's very similar in effect with an acrylic body. So remember we had this discussion about, doing things the good old way just to do them the good old way. I just wondering, is Sailor doing something like that right now?
But what I think they're doing with these new pens is that they seem to feature different urushi styles from across the country. At least that's what I'm reading into. That's what I'm hoping what they're doing. And if that is the case, I am all for that. That they have this one base model, and every few years they come up with a new urushi design based on some styling like Totori this time or whatever, right?
Right. And obviously the masters know more than I do. I'm just a scrub out here being a keyboard warrior. So what do I know? But yeah, that's just how I feel about the pens when I see them. But again, definitely want to see them in our hands. Otherwise, we really can't tell.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, and I think that's the episode, Jacob. You got anything else to add?
Only that this morning I thought we didn't have any topics for today.
And then now we're 14 minutes over how long we usually talk.
Yes.
All right. All right, so with that, that's been the episode. Thank you, everybody, so much. My name is CY. You can find me on my website at tokyostationpens.com, on Instagram and TikTok at tokyostationpens, and on Twitter at tokyostationmnh.
And my name is Jacob. I'm Foodafan on Instagram and on Twitter. I have a blog at foodafan.com, and I have not started doing sea shanties on TikTok just yet.
All right, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.